to Maxed Out Man, helping you become the man you were made to be.
Hey guys, it's Kevin Davis from the Maxed Out Man podcast. This is episode number 39. I am here with Sean Harvey. Sean is the Chief Compassion Officer and founder of the Warrior Compassion Men's Studio and the Symponia Facilitator Studio. See how well my Babel app has been working for me, which if I did it more often, it'd probably be working better. But Sean, I appreciate you being here. I'm going to let you kind of tell your story and what you do. We were talking before we started recording that this will be an interesting topic for me personally to kind of get, and honestly, this podcast, that's been the most exciting part of this whole thing is kind of learning from different people, exploring my own masculinity, my own inner self, and all that. So, hey, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time.
No, you're welcome, man. It's great to be here. So thanks for having me. Thanks for asking.
So, hey, tell me what, kind of give us your background. You got a few letters after your name. I looked at your website last night in preparation for this, and it's like tab, speaker, author. Like you do a lot of things, and I think you're helping a lot of people. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. I think I'll start with, I've been on this journey for probably about probably about a decade. I really started when I left Wall Street at 40. I was a consultant on Wall Street. I was a college professor. And I gave it all up on my 40th birthday and told the CEO of the firm I was leading a consulting division at that time in New York. And I walked into her office and said, I've lost my heart and my soul on the job. And I resigned as my birthday present.
Wow.
And within 2 weeks, this fashion company that I'd never heard of, Eileen Fisher, was looking for an internal consultant, and a friend of mine said, "Hey, we're hiring," and he said, "I think I'd be curious. I think I'd be interested," and that was really the start of this journey.
Wow! And did they hire you for something specific as a consultant?
So I was the internal change. I came in as an internal organization development partner, or in simple terms, I was an internal change agent for the creative teams.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. That's
in that company at Eileen Fisher, I was pretty much running retreats. And so I was pretty much developing and running full day retreats. I think my second year, I led 56 full days of retreats in a year, my second year. But it was what happened on my first day that I think was the moment that kind of changed the trajectory of my life. And so Eileen Fisher, for those who don't know, it's a women's fashion company based out of New York. And it's really run from a place of feminine leadership, a feminine energy company. And I, coming from Wall Street and college teaching, this was like if everything I knew about organizations got flipped on its head. Right. But it was on that first day, my two bosses sat me down for lunch, and I had just gone through an 8-month interview to get the job. And they said, Sean, we just want to acknowledge that you have proven yourself in the interview process. We now want you to stop proving yourself and learn how to be who you actually are.
Interesting.
When you interviewed with us, you showed us your heart and you showed us your polish. We hired you for your heart, and we want to see less of your polish. Stop trying to prove and share your accomplishments and achievements and all these things that as guys we're typically like trained that this is our calling card. And they're like, that's not going to work here.
That mask kind of a thing.
Yeah. Right? And so it was challenging the mask right out of the gate. And over the course, I was there for 5 years, and I started noticing this company was just different. It operated differently. The conversations were different. There was less focus on outcomes and more focus on process. We spent more time in the nuance. And it was a company that was about 1,200 employees and about 200 were men. So the first time being in a female-dominated environment.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot. I hit my head against the wall a few too many times. But what I noticed when I started talking to other men was, I would say, I feel like I'm changing. Are you changing? Has this place impacted you? And they were like, yeah, my wife said, and it usually started with my wife or my girlfriend. My wife said I'm more patient, or I listen differently. I stopped needing to be right all the time, and I started to be more curious. I started to have more access to my emotional expression. And I started to be more creative. I tapped into my creativity differently, and I was starting to solve problems in a new ways.
Hmm.
But the biggest thing was most of the guys said, I feel more comfortable in my own skin than I ever have. And, I've been through men's work. I lead men's work, and this was different. This was like organically just happening to guys without them even realizing what was happening. And they were just shifting, they were evolving, they were morphing. And I said, we got to bring whatever this is out to more men. And that my journey, in the book that I just wrote, that just published, is really the starting place is at 40, going on this journey with Eileen Fisher, and then everything that came after it over the last decade. My healing, and now having a roadmap for other men's healing.
And that book is Warrior Compassion, right? Just I went on Amazon this morning, so it launched just a few weeks ago, right?
Just a couple of weeks ago, yeah.
Nice. Congratulations on getting that out. And by healing, first of all, let me just say that over in 2017, my wife, who had been a homemaker to that time, started doing off-road rallies. We built a vehicle for her. She actually built most of it. And then she got involved in all female automotive builds. I don't know if you know what SEMA is. It's coming up in a little bit. It's the Special Equipment and Manufacturers Association, the largest automotive trade show in the world. She's had multiple vehicles in that as a kind of a homemaker turned, race car builder, rally driver, welder, fabricator, all of this stuff, which is it's an awesome story. But we were involved in all female builds. So like there's 80 tradeswomen, and they're welders and fabricators and car builders and painters and race car drivers. So like it was an interesting dynamic for me, because there was oftentimes I'm the only guy anywhere to be found. And, obviously these women, I would guess they are slightly different than fashion women. They tend to lean more towards the masculine, just as by nature. But there was still this femininity. And our exploration was kind of interesting, because there was almost this, they put on their own masks to hide their femininity, because they're existing in a masculine world. So I thought that was super, super interesting. And that's an interesting journey that you've had as well.
I think it's, having worked and consulted for 25 years, I see that, our systems have been built from a masculine perspective. And so it's really asking everyone in corporate America to put on a mask in some way. I think that's shifting now, but traditionally. Mm-hmm. So in so many of these male-dominated environments, it is leaning more into the masculine energy than the feminine energy, across the gender continuum, the gender spectrum. So, I think right now we're at a point where the rules, roles, norms, expectations around gender are just shifting so radically and so quickly. I often say, and for a lot of men, it's just like getting whiplash of what's happening. And then also the flip side of it is not giving men the space to even just contemplate, reflect, or even just say, how am I with all of this? Mm-hmm. And that's even the whole premise of my book is, I think right now men, and especially white straight men, are
also known as the enemy of society.
Oh, and that's the thing. It's like so many men are hearing the messages that something has to change. They have to change because they or something is broken. Mm-hmm. And the whole premise of my book is, no, you're not broken. There's not something that's broken. But there are probably a lot of men out there that are deeply wounded, who are suffering in silence, that just need an invitation into the healing journey that's less about fixing the problem, more about healing the wounds. And
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, and like when you said healing and wounds, I'm just, can you give us a little bit of context on that and kind of what that might look like?
Yeah, I think I describe a lot of guys who come onto their healing journey. Like there's usually something that happens. Sometimes it's I played by the rules, I played the game, I got the prizes. I'm still unfulfilled, or I'm still something's missing, or I'm miserable.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think the biggest thing is we're in this epidemic of loneliness, especially in the US, where men, we're just seeing statistically, are having fewer friends, fewer deeper connections. I think social media has just exasperated faux intimacy versus real intimacy and real connection.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've been in it, I think what so many men are yearning for is deeper connection to self, to other, to their own sense of their authentic core. And so I think it's that disconnection that is often the culprit. And what that can translate to is feelings of isolation and loneliness, feelings of unfulfillment, feelings of depression. We can often mask or cope with addictive behaviors, and then when we look at where we are in terms of the rates of suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And some of my work goes into working with police officers and military. And when I look at the numbers with police officers, everything just either gets double, tripled, or quadrupled in terms of the walking with the trauma from the job,
mm-hmm.
and not having the outlets to release it. And I think that's the thing. We just, for the most part, personal transformation work, healing work, the growth work, the spiritual growth work, it's much more accessible for women.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, I think, one, a propensity for it, two, there's more available for it, and three, there's less of a stigma around it. And so I think for men, it's like, how do we just create more of these invitations where there's less stigma, there's less of this is a sign of weakness, this is a sign of something's wrong, and more of, no, this is just a reflection of you being a human being. And this is just normally going to just make you a better, healthier human. One of the guys on we co-founded an organization or an initiative called Project Compassion, which was deepening compassion in police departments. And like five or six of us found each other. And one guy on the team is the former head of the FBI National Academy at Quantico. And we had a conversation one day, and at the end of it, and I was giving like my perspective, a lot of what's in my book. And, he said, Sean, I can't argue, refute, or rebut anything you just said. You're not talking about training cops to be better cops. You're talking about developing officers into better humans. Who can argue with that?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really the invitation, to help men come into their humanness and their humanity in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, that's it's interesting that you talk about cops, FBI, soldiers, because I think if there's any group that is like rub some dirt in it, kind of, that tends to be the culture, I'm sure. It's interesting because late at night, I typically kind of watch a show of some sort on Hulu or whatever, and I got addicted to watching these body cam shows for whatever reason. And obviously these shows are curated specifically to show certain stories. But one of the things that I noticed very heavily about this show is that, and one thing's that like, I didn't really realize this. So when there's an officer involved shooting, so a suspect, they have to shoot a suspect in order to neutralize the threat. They instantly go from that action to trying to save the suspect's life. So you have this group of cops that literally just put 15 bullets in this guy, who then instantly turn into EMTs, trying to get this, and oftentimes it doesn't happen. But I was struck by, and that's one story. The guy was had to pull a suspect out of a burning vehicle last night who basically tried to kill him, and all these things. But it's that compassion side that was actually surprising, especially now, because to your point, cops not only are, if you're a single, white male who happens to be a cop, you're like worse than, the worst car salesman out there, right? Like you're not a loved person in the general public. So I thought that was super interesting what we've been seeing on that.
Yeah, I think it's so many of the men that I meet, it's like we have so many preconceived ideas of what compassion is. Some will say it's a sign of weakness. Some will say that it's, not accessible. Some will, shun it. And yet, when you really look at our behaviors, so many men are already being compassionate in their way. And one of the things that I do in the book is I talk about the spiritual foundations, I introduce the definitions of compassion through 8 different traditions, faith traditions. So Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Sufism, Buddhism, Hinduism, shamanic practice, and integral spirituality. As an interfaith minister, just kind of seeing what's an interfaith perspective. And so just to give some of the spiritual grounding for why this work has been around for essentially eternity, for centuries and centuries. And it really is at the foundation of so many of our faith traditions, and we manifest it in different ways. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a feminine expression to show compassion. And I think what's challenging is for so many men, I think, are blocked emotionally, that we can intellectualize these ideas. We put them in action, but it can be hard for us to feel the visceral experience of being compassionate. And I think that's really the opportunity, is helping men feel in a different way, and ultimately helping men love in a new way. And when I talk about love, I think so many of us as men and as just people have been taught that love comes with conditions, right? And that if we don't have the full access to our emotional expression, then it's easy to intellectualize what love is. It's easy to feel the endorphins that come with love, right? But then when the love wane, like when those endorphins wane and it becomes just normal, then we can really have a misunderstood idea of what love is.
Yeah.
And if we've learned love with conditions, we can often put love with conditions, those expectations, on others and also ourselves. And so that's why when I think about compassion, I always think about that love is at the root of it. And it's really moving from this idea of love with conditions to this visceral experience of unconditional love. And what does it look like when men have the experience to be able to really give and receive unconditional love freely? And what becomes possible? And that's really the whole premise of the book.
Yeah, I think the receiving of unconditional love might be, more difficult of the two for a lot of for a lot of men. It's funny you talk about faith. I'm an evangelical Christian, so and we watch this show called The Chosen. I'm not sure you're familiar with it, but I love the portrayal of Jesus in that, because to me, as a man, he is like the quintessential example. Obviously, as a Christian, it's an important example, but he is, the dude was a carpenter. He was not a frail man like, some Catholic art would portray. He didn't look like, he wasn't feminine in any way. Carpenters at that point didn't have skill saws and table saws and all that. Everything was done by hand. They're picking up big timbers. So he would actually been a fit, what would be defined as masculine.
Right.
But his level of, unconditional love to the extreme. But his whole message is, come to me no matter what you've done, who you are. Like, it doesn't matter. like those things, because that's the true unconditional love from his perspective. And having those two sides of him is a great example, you know, whether you believe in the Bible or any of that stuff or not, looking at Jesus as a man and as a person is something that has always been super attractive to me, you know, as an example to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I've had this conversation a number of times. It was actually when I was in seminary that this whole notion for me, and what I coined was this idea of compassionate masculinity. What if masculinity was wrapped in compassion? What would that look like? And it really was this idea of, as men, if we come into our integrated masculine feminine, you know, the best qualities of both, you know, and we come into a different level of balance, you know, and we're able to, and I think the best description is balancing strength with tenderness,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or strength with sensitivity. That, you know, compassionate masculinity, warrior compassion is all about the integration and the blend. And when we come into our full selves, that's what makes us fully human. And you know, and I never use words like toxic masculinity. I never talk about, because I don't think it is.
Right. I have a sign on my wall that says toxic masculinity is not toxic. Some men can suck. So
right.
it's not a toxic masculinity. It could be just someone, you know, a person that is conveying themselves as toxic, you know.
Well, I think it's a construct, right? It's a construct that was created. What I find is it's a construct that that a number of men have just gleaned onto. That's their identity.
Yeah.
Right. And with the absence of access or stigma around the feminine. And so we're kind of operating imbalanced and kind of lopsided.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But what that feminine energy gives us, and I distinguish between the masculinity and femininity and masculine and feminine energy. And that those energies, when we are able to tap into them and become more balanced, I mean, that's what gives us the ability to be strong and also to be compassionate. What I find is in a lot of spaces and working with men, we're either by doing one of two things. We're either coming in hyper masculine and trying to beat the emotions out of us to get us to feel something.
Yeah, push that way, way, way down.
Right. And then they beat it so it comes up. And then you just, you know, but the flip side of it is, and what I've seen in a lot of conscious communities is there's such a demonization of the masculine,
mm-hmm.
that it's all in the feminine, and then we're moving into this emasculation of men, right? And I think what we're navigating in the world is as the feminine becomes more elevated, is how do we support men to navigate a changing world without emasculating men in the process? And that's why I think this is the balance of how do we become integrated, how do we become whole, how do we unblock the wounds that are holding us from love. You know, and as an interfaith minister, I really subscribe to the teachings of Christ. I subscribe to shamanic practice and just the connection to the earth. I'm also part Cherokee. I talk about that in the book. And so, and then one of the most transcendent transformational experiences I had in seminary was learning about the Sufi traditions and Sufi wisdom. And a lot, you know, you can translate it to like Rumi poetry. And so much of it is around the joy of the soul, the dancing and the play of the soul. But really it's really saying, how do we unblock the wound? So if Jesus is saying, you know, the message is love, the Sufis are saying, how do you unblock what's holding you back? Where are the cracks for the love to come through? Okay. And how can you expand the possibility of love for yourself, so that the more we love ourselves, that begets then the love that we can have for others.
Yeah. One of the things we've talked about on this podcast a few times with different guests is just my concern for young men now, especially. I mean, you're about my age. I'm 50. And, when we were growing up, it probably leaned towards the other side of the continuum, right? It's, hyper masculine in sports and all of those kind of growing up. But it seems like now, and I don't know if you can talk to this at all in your study, but these young guys, 16, 17, 18, and in that early 20s, like I feel for them because I don't think that they know how to become men. Like, I don't think there's any, because it's such a dynamic and honestly weird time in that way. And in some cases, they're told that it's not okay to lean into masculinity. It's, if you lean into feminine energy, then you're this or that, and so I'm curious, like what you're seeing in that regard, for my own edification more than anything, but that's kind of what we've talked about a lot.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. I think there's just a lot of confusion. When you are told that there's something wrong with your gender and you're getting that message, that's going to impact your psyche. And I find when young men, and I'll say, when I have 20 somethings come into my groups, they're often coming in from this place that they've talked about. Well, I keep hearing the masculine is bad. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the work I'm doing is, no, the masculine is good. We need this. We just don't need so much of it that it's out of balance, and then it's creating more problems for us. Right. And so, I think boys, young men, and men, I think some of what we're missing is we're missing some of this intergenerational connection. Mm-hmm. I think we're missing some of the mentoring, and I talk about this, but, as a gay man who came out at 16 or 15 in 1990, I just turned 50 myself. So, at 16, I started a gay and lesbian youth group for the city of Dayton, Ohio, which still exists today. Because I wanted a safe space for gay men and lesbian. That's, it's pretty much all the community was back then.
Yeah. It didn't have as many letters in 1990. It didn't have as many letters
back then. To have a safe place to come out, because what I was doing, I was sneaking into gay bars at 16 and I'm like, wait, what's happening here? And that wasn't where I wanted to be. And so, I think right now we're seeing a lot of, we're like I was saying, the intergenerational piece, the mentoring piece, for me, the generation before me was wiped out with AIDS, mm-hmm. pretty much. And then I think when I was 45, someone said, you're an elder in the community. I'm like, I'm only 45. I'm not ready to be an elder. All right. But it showed me the need for the mentoring. Probably even we need more mentoring than we need coaches at this point, I think.
Right. Yep.
And I think two things are missing. One, the intergenerational mentoring. And then two, what so many folks before us had were rites of passage and initiation.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode. I hope you're enjoying it and learning a lot. If you're looking for extra help, don't forget that I do offer one-on-one coaching. We can talk through a ton of different issues. I can give you guides, guidelines, and logistical help to help you take that next step or go to that next level in some of the things that you're dealing with in your life. We also have some course content, some guides, and a lot of educational materials over at maxedoutman.com. For the coaching, go ahead and go to maxedoutman.com/coaching, and you can learn about that. And then just go to maxedoutman.com for everything else. Thanks for joining us. Now back to the episode.
It just came natural with that we just don't have. Mm-hmm. even if it was going into the military or going into service,
Mm-hmm.
of some sort. We just don't have that these days. And so I think there's just not the structures in place that support men and young men as they're trying to navigate. And I think then we have, like I said, I'll keep coming back to, social media is, in some ways is great. In other ways, I think it's kind of killing us.
Oh, I lean towards the destroying our society side of that. I mean, I see the value in it, but if you look at, I mean, just statistically and timelines and those graphs, it's pretty clear.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you add a pandemic and isolation. I think that's exasperated both the isolation, the loneliness, and not necessarily being able to navigate the shifting gender roles and roles. And I think we're just creating more divides between men and women. And then when you add the conversations around trans and non-binary, that's just creating even more confusion for a lot of men.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And so I think we are in just really challenging times for men and young men to navigate. How do I find my way?
Yeah.
I remember I was on a talk with other men's work leaders. I remember the guy before me was saying, we need to show young men the way. And I came up right after and I said, no, we don't. We don't need
what is the way?
Right, exactly. We don't need to show young men the way. I think we need to ask young men the questions so that they can be in an inquiry to find their way. Right? I think it's really, the way I look at, the ways we deepen even our spiritual understanding. Because I think when I look at all the challenges out there, I just say, my first reaction is a lot of men are in spiritual crisis.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have, when I look at, as I go into faith organizations, I go into churches, I'm like, at this point, I'm like, okay, so it's like 89% women. Where are the men? Where do men go for spiritual discussions? And so the other element of my book is even just to make this accessible, of like practical spirituality for dudes. Of like, just because I think they're not ready to go, like in my book, go to Asheville and live with shamans and mystics. But I do think
get out the ayahuasca and let's go to town, right?
Yeah, those sorts of things. But I do think a lot of men have a lot of spiritual questions that they're just not asking or don't have a place to ask. And when we move to, the atheist, agnostic, spiritual, non-religious, where do you go for spiritual community? Where do you go for that inner compass, that sacred compass, that moral compass of how you navigate the world? So I think there's also that dimension that I speak more to that I don't often hear in a lot of men's circles.
Mm-hmm.
Is the spiritual component without being overly religious that may turn some folks off, but really an invitation to say there is a spiritual path for you that your soul is calling you to walk. How to help you get quieter to listen and then find your way.
Yeah. And even with that, it's a little bit of a, it's a navigation that becomes difficult because I joke and call it, leaning into the woo-woo, which is, that stuff, which has its own stigma and, that I lean more towards conservative Christianity and obviously, but, to your point about mentoring, I'm curious, it seems like too, as somebody that's, if I wanted to try to mentor a young person, first of all, trying to have that connection because it's, it's a little crazy, but then also having that freedom to how I can and can't share my own experiences, because I lean more to conservative. Like, is it okay to talk about my values and without even trying to enforce them on someone or indoctrinate them or whatever, but just to give my perspective, because I feel like in my case, 50-year-old, long-term married, monogamous, white male, Christian, how do you am I able to then share my experiences, my knowledge, my values with a young man just as a perspective, not necessarily as you need to be just like me kind of a thing.
Yeah, it's crazy where we are right now, isn't it? That you have to ask that question.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Right? Right? That you didn't, like, growing up, that never would have been a question.
No.
And today it is a question. And that's why, you know, my belief is, one, we all have a story and we all have a journey.
Mm-hmm.
And that we can share our experiences, we can share our journeys, and that we can share it from the perspective, as long as we're not saying this is the way, but we can say this was my way and this is what worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what gave me joy. This is what gives me happiness. This is what gives me meaning. And then I think if we can then, as a mentor, ask the questions, so what resonates for you in that? What questions you have? What doesn't resonate for you? So I think if we can hold our story loosely, not tightly, and I think if we can honor that the person in front of us, it may not be that my journey is your journey. It doesn't have to be. But I do think that sharing from our experiences of what works, how to navigate, to be a sounding board, to ask the questions, and have young men feel free to ask us questions. And I don't think, coming from a conservative, religious, Christian perspective, you know, I tend to be someone who works primarily with conservatives.
Mm.
And so it just happens to be that this is the community that I have probably the most connection with.
Interesting.
And my boyfriend is a Republican conservative. And
is that even allowed? I thought there was like some sort of set of rules that you guys were handed out.
If you read my book, you realize I don't go by rules.
Well, I have to, for sure.
And so I think it's, you know, and I find that so many conservatives are now at a point where they're afraid to share their views.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and many of them say, I'm a moderate, but anything that I say is going to come off like I'm on the right. So far on the right. And that's not okay. It's you know, if we're really, and I was in a conversation recently talking about how do we engage all men? Mm-hmm. How do we create a national initiative to engage men around healthy masculinity? It was a national conference or discussion. And I noticed it was very much a progressive conversation. And it was very much we, the Democrats, and them, the Republicans. And I just kind of stood up and I said, okay, so if we want to create a national initiative, the first thing we have to do is get beyond our partisanship.
Right.
Very partisan conversation. And I can tell you right now that your progressive language can't be heard by conservative ears at this point. We're so divided. So I think we need to get beyond identity and politics and go to the next level, which is, how do we speak from our shared humanity of our collective we? And that's going to be the ways that we can start engaging men across the continuum. And I think the other piece is, you know, what I find is the more I talk humanity, and that's how I'm, you know, when I start bringing in the humanity conversation, because I think what we really do in our interactions is we are mirrors of each other's humanity. Mm. We are reminders of our humanity. When I was a college professor, I would always tell my students, you know, I'm not teaching you rocket science. I would teach org behavior, organizational change, management, leadership. So I'm just teaching you common sense practices that aren't commonly practiced. I'm just reminding you of what's already within you. And I think that's really, you know, the more we can see each other in our humanity, you know, the more that we can see, even if we might be diametrically opposed in some of our views, if we can just acknowledge, okay, those are our views, but that's not our humanity. Mm-hmm. And then I see, you know, the way you love your children, the way you care about your community, maybe how you feel about the environment, you know, wherever you're really showing, like, where's your heart? Where's your compassion? Where's your connection?
Yeah.
You know? And then the question is, and where are you disconnected? You know? And that's within you. That's not you in your relationship to society. That's just within you. Where's the inner turmoil?
Yeah.
And that's the place to start, finding peace.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the opportunity we have here. And that's the opportunity I think that we have with men, is to be able, because I find that so many men are just like in some sort of inner turmoil with very few places to be able to express it, or very few outlets to be able to do it in a healthy way.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the opportunity.
And I think society right now, especially with the narratives and media and all that, like they want us to believe that everyone is on both ends of that continuum, right? Between conservative and super liberal. And like you pointed out, I think most people are in the moderate. We have our particular beliefs on certain hot button topics, but that doesn't necessarily define who we are. My daughter is a lesbian married to a woman. I'm a conservative Christian dad. Obviously that would not have been the lifestyle that I had envisioned, but we love her. And it's interesting because, and I don't think I've ever told this story before, but basically when she came out to us and had that conversation, she's like, well, I know you're going to love me anyway. And having that, her faith in that love was super important to us. And we've had conversation about, weddings and marriage and all of those things, and be able to navigate that in an open and honest way with her. And we absolutely love her wife. I consider now I have 3 daughters instead of 2 daughters. She's actually in the Army deployed right now. So be able to have these conversations as dad to a soldier, and all of those things. And like you would, if you just looked at my quote unquote, societal resume and you left that part out, you would never be able to believe that part of my story is true, right? Because we're told that that's not okay. You're supposed to kick that kid out and never love them and never talk to them again. And I think that's the narrative that we're told, in society.
Yeah, I think there's 2 things there. I think the supposed to, when we start realizing we're using the word should, that's the opportunity to get curious and say, okay, but why?
Mm-hmm.
Where's that should coming from? What should we do? But I think the bigger point is that we often just want to put people in buckets, in categories, and create these monoliths. I mean, men, all men are, we put like all men are this.
Yeah.
Right. All Republicans are this, all Democrats are this, progressives, conservatives. I'm like, no, I think, majority of people are a combination of many things. And we just want to add that label to say, okay, this is how we categorize you. And then we're losing the dimensions of the complexity of each person. And that's why I think the approach of inquiry is so much more important than the idea of I'm going to show you the way.
Mm-hmm.
Because none of this is a one size fits all at this point. And it's nuanced and it's complex, and we are complex. And so breaking out of, because you are X, you should think like this.
Mm-hmm.
And then life happens, it throws you a curveball, and then you're like, well, what do I really think about it? Or like you said, the love transcends everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And you start to figure out what your way is, and still how do you be in integrity with your own values.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode. I hope you're enjoying it and learning a lot. If you're looking for extra help, don't forget that I do offer one-on-one coaching. We can talk through a ton of different issues. I can give you guides, guidelines, and logistical help to help you take that next step or go to that next level in some of the things that you're dealing with in your life. We also have some course content, some guides, and a lot of educational materials over at maxedoutman.com. For the coaching, go ahead and go to maxedoutman.com/coaching, and you can learn about that. And then just go to maxedoutman.com for everything else. Thanks for joining us. Now back to the episode. Yeah, and in our case, to that point, it was like we had people that were like, we actually had more liberal people in our lives basically like judging us for not being out at a gay rally, at a pride rally next weekend. And then we had conservatives going, well, I don't know what I would do if I would do this, this, and this. And it's like, dude, neither one of you are going through this. So why don't you just shut up?
Right.
But it was interesting because, again, everybody wants to label everybody and kind of put them in this thing. And I often wonder, like in our case, with a lot of the people that we come in contact with, these are non-Christians. And for the most part, they don't know what to do with my wife and I, because, we've been married for 28 years. We're conservative Christians. We love, we're fairly loving people. I think I told you before that my kids call me the judgmental bastard, but my actual interactions with people wouldn't be indicative of that. But we were kind of the first Christians and conservatives that these people had come in contact with, and they often couldn't wrap their minds around it because they're like, wait, the people I see on the news that are wearing MAGA hats and, trying to bash gay people and telling, hate the environment and all of these things, like they don't know what to do with you because they can't really wrap their mind around the fact that people are different. People are dynamic, about that.
Yeah. Yeah, no. I mean, the fact that, a lot of my progressive friends, when they hear that I will work with, as a queer progressive minister, work with extremists and far-right white nationalists that are, I'm like, how does that work? And I'm like, it just does. And I think it's, part of this is the more we can defy some of this logic and really show what it means when we share compassion and humanity with each other.
Yeah.
And that, so many men right now are just lost, confused, frustrated, angry. And, how do we just show more compassion and humanity for each other?
Yeah. And what, I want to be respectful of your time, but what kind of, where do men start to kind of begin this journey? Yeah. Kind of how would you, obviously we want to have them go buy your book. That's a good start,
Right.
but to kind of learn more of the intricacies of those things. But if someone's just like, I'm exactly the guy that he's talking about. And I don't really know even how to begin to have the conversation with myself,
Right.
To begin the process.
I when I was in DC, when I lived in DC before I moved to Philadelphia, I was pretty lonely in DC. It can be a hard place it's a great place to work. It's a hard place to live sometimes.
Yeah.
And I created something called Men's Soul Adventures DC. Outdoor adventure meets deeper male bonding meets soul connecting, either philosophical, existential, or spiritual awakening discussions. And I just was like, I just want to create a community of cool people who are conscious and want to explore. I put it out on Meetup. 52 guys signed up in the first 24 hours.
Wow.
I was not expecting that. By the time I left DC, we had 180 guys in the group.
Nice.
And it kind of, I got savvy at one point. I just started saying, so why a soul adventure? Why not just an adventure?
Mm-hmm.
And it came into the responses were three things. One, they just wanted adventure, but just this sounded cool. So it was like, that was like a third of the group. Another third said they wanted deeper connection with other men. And then another third said they wanted to explore spirituality on some level. And they just had questions and they wanted to go deeper. And so I started to just, I think that the first step in my book that I talk about is find community with men and go do something. I don't necessarily think we need to sit in a room, and I'm biased here, but I sometimes I think, okay, if I'm just going to sit in a men's circle in a room with four walls, that's going to drive me crazy.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that's like I'm horrible at mindfulness and meditation. Like I do my own adaptation of what works for me. So I think to answer your question, I think one, finding a way to connect with more men, because I think the thing that happens when we can start breaking the ice, we realize the biggest thing, we're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
We're not alone in what we're struggling with. Second thing I learned was with men, when working with men, I would put out like intimacy labs and relationship labs and all these things, and no one would ever come. So I learned the power. It's not the head-on collision; it's the drive-by.
Mm.
And so in the drive-by, I would take men out on a soul adventure, and then we'd do a little bit of like meditation or just listening and getting quiet. And the first one I did, I always do it the week after Easter. It's usually the week after Easter, right after Passover, in the middle of Ramadan. And so that's really a time of new beginnings and awakening. And so I just kind of put that out there. And I kid you not, the moment I said, okay, so what are new beginnings for you? Every guy, I'm in a divorce, I'm getting divorced, I'm just out of, like, I'm in a breakup, and every guy wanted to talk about their relationships. I'm like, okay, so the drive-by, just create that invitation just enough. And two things happen. One, guys don't realize how deep they can go so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And how much they're willing to share and be vulnerable. And two, again, that power of I'm not alone. So I think the first thing is look for some of those opportunities to just connect with men on a deeper level, but do it in a way that works for you.
Right.
And then I would say, the second thing I often say is start to practice seeing the world with childlike wonder. And what do I mean by that? So many of us have had this idea that we have to be serious and we can't be playful. Or we've had to let go of the playfulness. And when you think about it, when we came out of the womb, we had everything we needed. We had all of it. We had our whole selves. And then day by day, piece by piece, certain parts of us just started to like get suppressed, get rejected, get voted off the island. And so I think this work is really reclaiming that.
Mm-hmm.
I think this work is, one, taking the time to discover the truth of who we are at our core, in connection with our soul, and then to see others as they are on their journey to discover themselves and they find their truth. And then to be able to, the biggest part is then to be able to accept both truths as true without one truth being better than the other. Right. And that's, I think, the hardest part for folks.
Yeah, that's the challenge, right?
That's the challenge. From that place, that is the place where I think we can start to come into this work of humanity. But to your question, I think it's first two things to do. Find a community of guys.
Mm-hmm.
Start to play together. Give each other permission to play, and then give each other permission to go deep, and then start to discover and be on a journey together.
I love it. I think it's great. And I think, one of the best things about this podcast is to be able to have conversations that I ordinarily would not be able to have. Like, and I think this is a great example of that, because obviously my background and your background and who you are and who I am, at the surface seems like they're in some ways they're diametrically opposed. Like I said, like if you look at our societal resume,
right.
But there's so much connection here that you and I can have this open and honest conversation, regardless of whether or not, we totally agree. One of my best friends is an atheist, and we can have that open and honest conversation without the vitriol that I think is quote unquote expected of us. Mm-hmm. And I think this is, not that this is that diametrically opposed, but I think this is an awesome conversation. Yeah. I think hopefully this will serve as as a learning experience and a good example for people that want to listen to it. But hey, tell me, so it's warriorcompassion.com, right?
Warriorcompassion.com. Here's the book.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I think we're probably a few weeks out from this launching. So we'll be able to see that you'll have more than 4 or 5-star reviews, I think, like you had this morning. So it's good. It's better than 4 1-star reviews.
It's true. It's true. A number of people are buying the book, and people that have already ordered in the pre-sale, they'll be getting their book in a couple weeks.
Nice.
So, yeah, I'm excited. I'm starting to organize a 12-city tour across the country, a book tour. And, getting this last night, a buddy of mine started using the book and starting to create a curriculum for men's circles.
Oh, cool.
And so finding new ways to just bring the message. For me, it's less about selling the book and more about just getting the message out.
Yeah. And did you do an audiobook version of it?
I did not. Not yet.
Well, I might need that. So you'll have to just record one. You just have to record one for me personally. So
You got it.
I'm sure you do that for everybody, Hey, man, Sean, thank you very much. I appreciate for your time and for coming and sharing what you do. I'm very thankful for this time, and I wish you the best with the new book and with the tour and with everything you're doing to kind of help men, as we say, be who you were made to be, right? Like that's our little tagline, is to help people, wherever you're starting, you could probably be not necessarily better, but be more than you are right now. So I appreciate that very much, and hope you have an awesome day.
Thank you so much. It's been great being with you.
If you're looking to really maximize your life and become the man you were made to be, head over to maxedoutman.com and get your journey started today.